Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Daf Yomi. Well done and Mazel Tov to everyone on completing Maseches Yoma this week. And all being well, we are going to start Maseches Sukkah this morning, which, would you believe, is all about Sukkah. The first chunk deals with the halachot of building a sukkah and the measurements and everything that goes into ensuring that one has a kosher, valid sukkah. And then there's also a chunk of the Masechta that talks about the Arba Minim, the four species, the Lulav, the Etrog, the Hadassim, and the Aravot. Good morning to all those just signing on. We were just in the process of wishing Mazel Tov to everyone finishing Masechet Yoma and starting Masechet Sukkah this morning, which we are going to do now. And of course, as always, we never start at the right place. We'll start by having a look at the Mishnah from just a couple of days ago, and then we'll start with Daf Dalad, page 4. So the Mishnah tells us as follows: Sukkah shehi gavoha lema'ala me'esrim amah psula. If a sukkah is higher than 20 amot, then it will be invalid for use as a sukkah. Rabbi Yehuda machshir. Rabbi Yehuda says that it can be valid. V'she'ena gavoha asara tefachim, and if it is not high, if it is not as high as 10 tefachim, if it is lower than 10 tefachim, then it will be pasul, it will be invalid. V'she'en la shlosha tefanos, and if it doesn't have 3 walls, at least 3 walls, then it will be invalid. And we'll see what do all these different things mean, and what does 3 walls mean? Does it mean you have to have 3 whole walls? Does it mean that you have to have 2 walls and just a tefach into the 3rd wall? All of that gets discussed. And then, sorry, just one second. Yeah. And then the final clause mentioned in the Mishnah is v'shechamasa meruba metzilasa. If there is more sunlight making its way into the sukkah than shade provided by the schach, then it's going to be invalid. The sukkah, it's called a sukkah because of the schach, Rashi says. So there has to be a decent amount of shade coming from the schach for it to be considered a valid sukkah. So that was the Mishnah. And then we pick it up at the bottom of Gimel Amud Beis, the bottom of 3b, in which we're going to see a whole bunch of different questions, a bunch of different halachic possibilities as to whether you are going to end up with a kosher, valid sukkah or not. So that's where we pick it up today, right at the bottom of 3b. We are literally 2 lines up from the bottom, starting from over here. So says the Mishnah, the first case that we're going to be looking at, trying to ascertain whether it can be a valid sukkah. Haisa gavoha me'esrim amah. You have got a sukkah which is 20 amot high. Okay, so that's going to be a problem that we saw in the Mishnah. It's too high. There are reasons for this that we talk about. Fundamentally, it's because we're not going to be able to see the roof in normal usage, and so we're not going to really feel like we're sitting in a sukkah. So if you're sitting in a sukkah that's 20 amot high, uval ma'ata b'charim uchasasos. And then what you do is, and check this out, guys, you should now be able to see a picture on your screen. Yes, thumbs up for yes. Brilliant. So what you do is you put in some pillows and some cushions so that you are reducing the airspace of your sukkah, and in so doing you now have a sukkah where the airspace is less than 20 amas. But the Gemara says the halacha would be lo have miyut. It's not going to be considered a halachic reduction of size. So let's try and see why that might be. So says the Gemara, va'af al gav devat linhu lechulhu mishum devat ladato etzel koladam. Even though he may be intending to leave it there for the whole of Sukkot, okay? So he nullified it in the sense that he's going to leave it there for the whole of Sukkot. It's always going to be filling that airspace. It's always going to be serving as a reduction to the airspace of the sukkah, the Gemara says, since most people would not treat this as nullified material, right? What we're trying to do is make it as similar to dirt or to dust as possible, right? If it becomes like the ground, like the dust of the earth, then it will be considered to be a valid reduction in airspace. But since most people would not leave cushions and pillows lying around for a whole week, so even though he may intend to do so, the halachic significance of this is diluted because most people wouldn't do that, right? So the Gemara then starts to explore what we're talking about in general. So teven uviklu have miut, the kol shekain afar uviklo. So straw, right? If you had straw that you were going to leave on the ground, and then you were going to just completely put your mind away from this straw, I don't need it, I'm just going to leave it there. So then the Gemara says have miut. This would count as a valid reduction in airspace. The kol shekain, all the more so, afar of it, all the more so if it was dirt which was being nullified. Then we see a little bit further. Teven ve'ein asid lifnosa. What if you have got straw on the ground? Ve'ein asid lifanosa. So there's a couple of different stages here that we need to keep in mind. There's a concept of bittul, which is where we are completely declaring it. I'm not going to move it. It's going to stay there, right? And if you were declaring it as being bittul, as being null and void, it's going to stay there. We're not going to move it. So then everybody would agree that it's batel, that it is going to become there permanently for that time. Okay, then there's a condition or a clause called ein atid lifanoto, that you're not going to remove it at some point in the future. We're going to see there's a machlokes. There's going to be Rabbi Yossi who says that if you don't declare that it's going to be there the whole time, but you're also not planning to remove it, then it's going to be nullified. And the Rabbanon would say, no, it's not going to be nullified. Then you have a clause called stam, right? You don't declare that that you're going to keep it there permanently, but you also don't have any intention of removing it at any point. It's just stam that you're putting it there. So again, that's also going to be subject to a machlokes as we see. We're going to see that it depends on whether it's straw or whether it's dirt. We're going to see that it depends on whether you're Rabbi Yossi or whether you're Rabbanan. Okay, if it's dirt, then according to Rabbi Yossi, that's going to be more capable of being nullified. If it's straw and you don't know, you're not sure what you're going to be doing with it, then we're concerned that you're going to remove it to give it to animals for food or something of that nature. So it's not going to be nullified. And then the final clause is atid lifnoto. You do plan to move it, in which case whatever you're putting down, everyone would agree that it's not going to work to diminish this airspace. So that's what we're going to be exploring now in the Gemara. I just want to see if I got a picture here. Okay, so there you go. There's your straw, and you are nullifying it, and that would be considered a valid reduction in airspace. And then I think we'll come to okay. Let's try that one again. That's the straw filling the airspace of the sukkah, which if you are planning to leave it there the whole time, then we saw in the Gemara just now that it would be considered to be a valid reduction in airspace. We'll come to that one in a moment. Okay, so moving on with our Gemara. Teven ve'ein asid lefanosa. If you have got straw and you haven't declared it to be there the whole time, but you're not planning to move it, or you have got afar stam, you've got dirt, but you're not planning to move, you're not sure what you're going to do with it, and you haven't declared it for anything, so then it's going to be a machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbanon. That's what we were leading to. Ditnan, because it says in a Mishnah, if you have a bias, shemil ahu teven ot sororos uviklo mevutar. If you have a house which is filled with straw, or it's filled with pebbles, and you decide and declare that it is going to be nullified, then mevutal. What's this in relevance to? Okay, you're all able to see the picture there on the screen. So there's a concept called tumas ohel, which is where tumah can spread within any shared airspace with a roof. Okay, so if there is airspace, then you can see our little dead body down here in the corner of the screen. So the tumah that comes from this dead body will fill a whole room if there's airspace. Okay, and if there is airspace, then everything inside the room will become contaminated, and everything above the room will be pure. If there was no airspace, then the tumah would just be going straight up. That would be like a regular buried person. You can't walk over a burial plot in a cemetery because the tumah goes straight up. So once upon a time, when we were very concerned about ritual impurity, if you were to walk over the airspace of a grave site, then you would become impure. All right, but if there was airspace within the house, within the building, like we see in this picture, or even within a grave site, if there was a tefach of airspace above a corpse, then the tumah would not penetrate upwards. So here's the question: if I've got a house that is filled with pebbles or it's filled with straw, okay, will the tumah rise up above the roof, or is that room now considered to be completely filled? If it's considered to be completely filled, then the tumah is going to penetrate up through the roof and out and make the item on the top of the roof impure. If it is considered to be that it's not considered as filling the room, then the tumah will fill that whole house. So by the Mishnah telling us that teven, which is inside this house, or tsroros, and you've nullified it, then it's going to be nullified, which means it's there permanently, which means the tumah is going straight up and out of the building. To which the Gemara says, bitlo in. If it was explicitly declared as nullified, then yes, it would be. Lo bitlo, lo. If you had not explicitly nullified, then it won't be. V'tani Allah, Rabbi Yossi Omer, and on this Rabbi Yossi taught us, Teven ve'enasid lifanoto, if you've got straw where you have no intention to remove it, then harihu ka'afar stam, that will be treated like dirt, where you're not sure what you're going to do with it, but it will be batel, it will be nullified. Which means if you had your sukkah with this straw and you had no intention of taking it away, then it would diminish the airspace of the sukkah. Afar va'atid lefanot, or if you had dirt but you were planning to remove it, then harihu kistam teven v'lo batel. Then it would be like teven, which you have not designated and you're not sure what you're going to do with it, v'lo batel, and it would not nullify the airspace. So that is the answer to our first question. If I am trying to diminish my airspace of my sukkah, then I have to have something there which is going to be designated to be there the whole time. Not pillows and cushions, but if I've got straw, if I've got dirt, whatever it might be, and I'm deciding that I'm going to leave it for the whole of sukkahs, then that can be, that will diminish the airspace. We move on to our next case, which is as follows. Haisa gavoha me'esrim ama. I've got a 20 ama high sukkah. V'hutzin yordin betoch esrim ama. But the schach, the thickness of the schach, is descending into the airspace of my 20 amot. Okay, so I don't have a picture for that one, but if we can try and visualize our 20 amot high sukkah, and the schach is coming in a couple of amot, it's very, very thick. So is that going to diminish the airspace or not? So the Gemara says, Im silasa meruba mechamasan kashera. If there is more shade than sunlight in your sukkah, then kashera, then it will be considered to be diminishing the airspace and it will be a valid sukkah. V'im lav pasula. But if the sunlight is greater than the shade, then pasula, then it's going to be an invalid sukkah. What about the other way around. What about like this? Case number 3. If I have a sukkah which is only 10 tefachim high, as can be seen in this picture, v'hutzin yordin letoch asara, and the schach is descending into that airspace of 10 tefachim. So what's going to be the situation now? Is my sukkah going to be considered smaller than 10 tefachim, in which case it's not valid, or because my sukkah is 10 tefachim high, so then it is going to be valid? So the logic is going to apply, but in the opposite direction. Savar abaya lemeimar im chamasa meruba metzilasan kashera. If the amount of sun that's coming into the sukkah is greater than the amount of shade, then it will be a valid sukkah because the schach is not impacting on the calculation of the airspace. So I am left with a 10 tefachim sukkah. But if my shade is greater, so my schach is effective, then it's going to be considered to be too small because the schach is entering too much into the airspace. Amale Rava says hadira sarucha hi ve'ein adam da badira sarucha. Rava says whichever way you look at this is not a cozy sukkah. It's a dira sarucha. Translates it there on the screen as a sagging residence. The person doesn't live in a dira sarucha, even though it might be a temporary residence for the purposes of sukkahs. Person's not going to. It's not covetic. It's not comfortable. It's not respectful for a person to be using a sukkah that is of such small proportions. Okie dokie. Case number 4. Here we go with case number 4. Are these pictures helping, by the way? Yeah? All right. Where did I get... Oh, that's good. I got them from this book here, which is called Hahod v'Hahadar. And it's got pictures associated with the Gemara all the way through. And they're computer-generated images. So, very, very worthwhile if you're able to get your hands on a copy. I'll send it to you on WhatsApp later. Okay, so now here's a little bit more technical. So just ride along with me, guys. All right, the next case number 4 is Haisa gavoha me'esrim ama. You've got a sukkah that is 20 amas high. Ubana ba itztaba keneged dofan ha'entzai. And what you're doing is you are constructing. Oh, that's the wrong picture. That was our schach coming into our 20 amot sukkah. Oh, they're all in the wrong order. Okay. So I've got a sukkah that's 20 amas high, and I'm putting in a platform, an itztaba. Can you see that brick platform there into the sukkah? And so that should be diminishing my airspace, but it's only diminishing my airspace in part of the sukkah, right? So if I do that, keneged dofan ha'entzai, all right, if we picture 2 side walls and then a back wall, that back wall is the dofan ha'entzai, it's the center wall, okay? And I'm putting an itztaba along that whole wall. So if we were looking at it from a bird's eye view, okay, which if you've got a Gemara in front of you, you might be able to do. I'll try and show you here on the screen. Can you see those diagrams in the middle of my Gemara over here? Yeah. So if I've got my itztaba on my central wall, where have we gone? Over there. Okay. So if that itztaba is enough footprint for a kosher sukkah, then what I've got is an itztaba with the right dimensions for a sukkah, and it's got 3 walls around it, and those 3 walls all have a reduced airspace, so it's now lower than 20 amas, which should mean that I have a kosher sukkah, right? David's eyebrows are twitching over there, but I'm hoping that makes sense. At least for the area where the itztaba is, you've got dimensions for a kosher sukkah, right? Because the airspace where that itztaba is is less than 20 amos. So the Gemara says as follows. 1 second, I'm just trying to toggle between all my different things. There we go. So al panei kula yesh ba sukkah kashera. So if I've got this itztaba across the whole of this middle wall, all right, and there's enough space on that itztaba for it to be considered a kosher sukkah, then the sukkah is going to be kosher, right? At the very least, on top of that itztaba, you'll be able to fulfill your mitzvah of eating in the sukkah, whatever you want to be doing in the sukkah. As long as that area is fit for purpose, then the airspace is considered to be reduced. What about though umin hatzad? What about if it's not against the back wall, the central wall? Okay, it's against this side wall. In which case, now if we were looking at it from a bird's eye view, it's only got two walls. Yeah, it's only got two walls because that third wall is not part of the Itztabaz Sukkah. Okay, so what's the halacha there? So the Gemara tells us. Oh, 1 second, you're not able to see the picture, right? So where you've got the Itztabah along one side of the wall, now I don't have three walls encompassing it. So what's the halacha over there? So the Gemara says, Uminatzad, im yesh misfat hitztava lakotel arba amot, if there is less than 4 amot from the edge of this itztaba to the wall of the sukkah, sorry, if there is 4 amot, then pasula, then it's going to be pasul. If there's less than arba amot, if there's less than 4 amot to the wall, then the Gemara says kashera, then it's going to be kasha. Why is it going to be kasha? Why is it going to be pasul? Well, here is one of the halachic fictions that we rely on for building a sukkah, which is a concept known as dofen akuma, the bent wall. Right, so you'll just have to ride along with me on this and just trust me. But there's a halachic fiction called the dofen akuma, which is where, as long as you don't have a 4 amot space, then that wall that's at a distance from the itztaba is considered to be further in than the actual reality would seem to indicate. And so that's why it's going to be a valid sukkah, because actually that wall halachically is considered to have bent over and be in line with the itztaba. Hopefully, I'm explaining this in a way that is understandable. I'm not going to say it's clear, but hopefully it's understandable. So, my kamash malan, what is this halacha teaching us? That amrinan dofen akuma, that we apply the halacha of a curved wall in this instance. But Tanina, we have learnt this already. Bias shenifchas v'sikech al gabav, in an instance where is that going to be our case? Yeah. Bias shenifchas v'sikech al gabav. So if I make a hole in my roof, okay, and we may have all seen instances like this in people's homes or in certain shuls where you have a sukkah roof. So it's a normal room and you've cut out a hole in the roof and that's going to be your sukkah. So how does that work? Because usually when we're doing that, the roof or the schach, the sukkah, is not right up to the edge of people's homes. It's usually a skylight. Yeah? Quick show of hands if you've seen things like this in people's homes or in people's shuls. Fantastic. So how is that working halachically? The answer is it's relying on dofen akuma. As long as there are not 4 amot to the sides of the person's room, it's going to be considered a kosher sukkah. So as long as you're sitting underneath the schach, it's going to be a kosher sukkah, because these bits of ceiling, these bits of roof that are less than 4 amot are going to be considered as part of the wall because of dofen akuma. That's how it's working. So we've learned this already in the Mishnah, which is why we shouldn't need to say it over here, that if you've got a house with a sukkah roof and you've put schach on it, im yesh min hakota lasikuch arba amos pasula. That if you've got 4 amot from the wall to where the schach is starting, it's not going to be a kosher sukkah. Hapachos mikan kashera. But if you've got less than this, then it's going to be kosher because of dofen akuma. So why should we need to mention the halacha in our Gemara if we've already got another source that tells us that we can rely on this? So mahu desema. What are you? What might you have thought? So hasam hu dechazia ledofan, aval hacha delo chazia ledofan emalo kamash melam. You might say over there that over there in the case of the house. One second, have I got? Can't remember what I've got open for you. So over there in the case of a house, the wall of the house you may think is suited to be the wall of a sukkah. And that is why Dofen Akuma is telling us that it is counted as the wall of a sukkah. And as long as you're underneath the schach, the airspace of the schach, you're going to be inside a valid sukkah. But maybe over here, over here, where our sukkah is too high, yeah, and so there's this gap to the wall from the platform, and so I might think that because I'm using a wall which is way too high, maybe then it's not going to be considered dofen akuma. That's why kamash malan. That's why we needed to be taught the case in our Gemara here, that where I've got a gap from the platform to the wall, even though that wall is 20 amot high and it shouldn't count as reducing the airspace, nonetheless, the Gemara is teaching us that it is going to count as dofen akuma. Whew! Number 5. Yeah. Have a wonderful, meaningful day. He'll watch it on the recording. Mm-hmm. That's right. The sukkah is called so and is considered temporary on account of the schach. So that's how you can have a permanent structure. But if the schach is the temporary feature, then it's going to be considered a valid sukkah for dwelling. So I hope that is of some assistance. Case number 5. I mean, granted, you might think that it spoils all the fun if you're not sitting in your wellies in your adapted garden shed, or whatever it is that people do, and people sit in considerable comfort in their nice luxurious dining rooms with a whopping great big hole in the roof of it. But it will be a valid sukkah, and as long as there's not 4 amot from the schach to 3 of the walls, then it will be a valid sukkah. So in Hale, that's exactly what they've got. They've got this long skylight, and as long as they've got all the partitions up, then they've got 3 walls that they're relying on that are less than 4 amot away from the schach, and they're relying on dofen akuma, as they are doing in numerous other shuls where they may have an indoor sukkah. Please God, we should have such problems in Bushi at some point. So, Haisa Gavoha Me Esrim Ama Uvana Itztaba Be'emsiasa. So I've got a sukkah which is 20 amas high, and I've built an itztaba in the middle. So what about that kind of scenario? Is that what I've got on the picture here? Let's have a look. I'm not sure that it is. I think that's what I'm picturing here. So I have got an itztaba in the middle. Okay, I think that's the case that we're on. So the Gemara says, Im yesh misfas itztaba uladofan arba amos lekol ruach v'ruach pasula. So if there are 4 amos from my itztaba, from my platform, to the sukkah on all sides, then it's going to be invalid. Pasula, it's going to be invalid. Pachos me'arba amos kashera. But if my platform, which is reducing my airspace, gets to the sukkah on all sides within less than 4 amos, then it's going to be valid. So that's how I've got my itztaba in the middle over here. Right, my itztaba has to fit the required measurement for a valid sukkah, and as long as I'm able to get to the walls in less than 4 amot, then it's going to make it a valid airspace for a sukkah. So the Gemara says, "My kamash melan da amrina dofen akuma." What's this coming to teach me? That we can rely on the bent wall. Hainu hach, same problem. We've already learned the halacha of dofen akuma from the house. So why do I need to have this unique case brought in the Gemara? I would say, but what might I have thought? Dofen akuma meruach achas amrina. Maybe I would think that you can rely on dofen akuma in one direction. Aval kol ruach v'ruach lo. But maybe in every direction, to say that we're just going to magically cause these walls to be halachically considered to be bent in, maybe then I shouldn't extend it that far. Kamash Malan, this comes to teach us that the halacha even applies if I've got an itztaba plonk in the middle of my sukkah, and then I'm relying on dofen akuma for all 4 sides. Says the Gemara, case number 6. If I have a sukkah which is less than yud tefachim, so it shouldn't be valid. And then I'm digging a hole in the floor of the sukkah, so that from the bottom of the hole to the top of the sukkah it's 10 tefachim. So will that be a valid sukkah? So im yesh misfas chakak ulekotel gimel tefachim psula. If there is a distance of 3 tefachim between this pit and the wall of the sukkah, it's going to be disqualified. If there is less than 3 tefachim between the pit and the wall of the sukkah, then it's going to be valid. As we turn to Amud Beis, pachos mishlosha tefachim kashera. If there's less, then 3 tefachim will be valid. Why? What are we relying on over here? We're not relying on dofen akuma. We're relying on something called lavud, another halachic fiction, which is a halacha that says that if you've got 3 tefachim in your sukkah where something is not, or less than 3 tefachim, where something is not the way it should be, so halachically we can ignore that. So halachically we can ignore these less than 3 tefachim, and due to this halachic fiction of lavud, it will be considered as if it's part of the wall space. Okay, so my airspace now is 10 tefachim, and as long as I'm less than 3 tefachim away from the wall, I can rely on it. We rely on lavud as well for things like eruvin, for the eruv. That if you've got an airspace of less than 3 tefachim, it's not going to be considered like an actual gap. So the Gemara says, Azoi, Gemara says, Maishna Hasan da amart pachos me'arba amos, and Maishna Hacha da amart pachos me'shlosh tefachim. Why was it over there a minute ago with my platform in the middle of my sukkah that I was asking about 4 amos, and over here with my little sukkah I'm asking about 3 tefachim, 3 handbreadths? That's way smaller than 4 amos. So why am I not able to rely on the same kind of halachic principle? So the Gemara says, Hasam de'isei ledofan, pachos me'arba amos sagi. So over there, what you had was a wall. You had a big wall, but you had a wall nonetheless. So over there, for it to be less than 4 amos away was sufficient. Hacha l'shavuye ledofan. But over here, I don't have a fit wall because my wall is less than 10 tefachim. And so my ditch, my pit, is what's going to make it a permissible height. And so therefore, pachos mishlosha tefachim in, I'm relying on a different halachic principle. If it's less than 3 tefachos, then it's going to be valid. Ilo, lo. And if it's not, then it's going to be invalid because I'm relying on lavud, I'm not relying on dofen akuma. Case number 7. Haisa gavoha me'esrim ama uvana ba amud shehu gavoha asara tefachim v'yesh ba hechsha sukkah. So the Mishnah now, oh goodness me. Ah, there it is. So I've got a sukkah of 20 amas, and I've put a column, I've put a pillar in the middle of my of my sukkah, and my my pillar is 10 tefachim high, and it has the right dimensions for a sukkah. V'yesh ba hechsha sukkah. The dimensions of this sukkah make it a valid footprint for a sukkah. So what's the halacha going to be? So here we're not relying on dofen akuma, and we're not relying on lavud. We're relying on another halachic fiction. Hey, welcome to the party. We're relying on another halachic fiction called good asik. Good asik, and good asik means that as long as I've got some valid airspace, okay, then halachically we can continue, even though there's no physical walls there, I can continue all the way up to wherever the schach is, right? And even though there's no physical wall there, halachically it's considered to be a wall. No. Yeah? So that is the halacha of good asik, where I'm extending the airspace, the wall space, as it were, of this sukkah, all the way up to the schach. And so as long as I'm inside and on my little platform, my column over here, I will have a valid sukkah. So that's what we're talking about in this instance. So the Gemara says, Sava Abaye lemeimar, Abaye holds, good asik mechitzasa, that the concept of extending these partitions, even though it's all just airspace, right? But we're halachically extending the walls to be considered as if they're there, because the column is at least 10 handbreadths high, 10 tefachim high, and so we're just extending this partition up. So Amale Rava ba'inon mechitzas hanikaras veleka. Rava disagrees. He says you need to have physical walls, partitions over there, and you don't have any. So for Rava, he's not going to hold that is a valid sukkah, but for Abaye, he's going to hold that it is. So from here, we branch, pun intended, out to another scenario. So we'll get the picture up in a second. So the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Na'atz arba'a kundisin v'sikech al gavan. So if I've got a rooftop and I've put in 4 poles on top of my roof, and then I've put schach on top of those 4 poles, so is that going to be a valid sukkah or not? Well, if we're looking at the picture, we can see it doesn't have any walls whatsoever, right? So it shouldn't be a valid sukkah. But if we follow the principle of good asik, right, then what I'm doing is I'm saying that the walls of my building will continue to rise upwards. And so even though I might not have a physical wall in place, the good asik principle teaches that as far as the halacha is concerned, this is to be a closed off sukkah, in which case it's got 4 walls, in which case even though it's only got these 4 poles in the corner of the roof, it's going to be considered to be a valid sukkah. So on this case, Rabbi Yaakov machshir, Rabbi Yaakov says it's going to be a valid sukkah because it's got good asik. V'chachamim poslim, and the rabbis are going to say it is unfit, it is invalid. So Amar Rav Huna says machlokes al sfas hagag. The machlokes between the dispute between Rabbi Yaakov and the chachamim is where the 4 posts are on the edge of the roof. So Rabbi Yaakov Savar Amrinan Good Asik Mechitzasa, because Rabbi Yaakov will say we can rely on Good Asik. Rabbanan Savri Lo Amrinan Good Asik Mechitzasa, and the Rabbanan hold that we do not rely and we do not hold of Good Asik creating these partitions. Aval be'emtza hagag divrei hakol pasula. But if I had my four poles in the middle of my gag, then everyone is going to hold invalid, because you cannot rely on good asik, because the wall space going up is now not in line with our poles, and so according to everybody, we're going to say that it's not a valid sukkah. Rav Nachman Omer, Rav Nachman Amar, be'ensa hagag machlokes. Rav Nachman says that actually everyone would agree if your sukkah looked like that it would be kosher, and it's only over here where the sukkah is in the middle. That's where they are arguing. According to Rabbi Yaakov, you'd still be able to say good asik, and according to the Rabbanan, you wouldn't be able to say good asik. No, because you still need to have three. No, but it's all you. Well, that was our first mission. It said if it doesn't have three walls, then it's not going to be considered a valid sukkah. So it has to have three walls at least. You were asking if I've got if I've got a permanent room, right? My house does not feel like a permanent structure. That's what I thought you were asking me. Yeah. But the first Mishnah told us that it has to meet a certain requirement in terms of height, and then the other clauses were it has to have three walls, and it has to have more shade provided by the schach than sunlight getting through. So there's still a requirement to have three walls. The question is, are we able to rely on these halachic fictions to close the gaps of the walls? And in this case, where the sukkah is in the middle, according to Rav Nachman, it's a machlokes. According to the other position, everyone would agree that that is most certainly not going to be a kosher sukkah. But let's look at this a little bit further. The Gemara says, "Iboilehu." It was asked. The question was asked. But emsa hagag machlokes aval al sfas hagag divrei hakol kashera. So is the machlokes about when these poles are in the middle of the roof, but if they were on the edge of the roof, then everyone would hold that it is valid? Or dilma bein bazar uvein bazar machlokes? Or is it, as we were perhaps thinking beforehand, that whichever version there's going to be a machlokes? So the Gemara says, taken, the dilemma will remain unresolved. And as we've said before, someone pointed out to me that Teku stands for four Hebrew words. Tishbi Yetaretz Kushyas Kushyas something else. Tishbi Yetaretz Kushyas Shilas, maybe. That we have to wait for Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Tishbi, to come and resolve all of these different questions in the Gemara that are left unresolved. So now the Gemara says, Meisaveh, we're going to challenge this, we're going to raise an objection to this principle. Na'at arba kundesin ba'aretz. What if I am putting in four poles in the ground, v'sikech al gaban, and then I am putting schach on top of them? Right, so we're not relying on any building wall over here to say good asik. So we should look at this and say, well, obviously that's going to be invalid because there's no good asik. Where are the walls coming from? Whichever halachic fictions you want to go with, where would these walls be coming from in such an instance? At least when it was on top of a house, I had the wall space that I could say, yeah, fine, good asik, it's part of the walls. But here I'm on the ground. I don't have anything to rely on. So, nonetheless, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yaakov machshir, v'chachamim poslim. Rabbi Yaakov says valid, and the chachamim say pasul. So the Gemara says, v'ha'eretz teke'em sahagag dami v'kam machshir Rabbi Yaakov. But shouldn't the ground be more akin to the scenario of the sukkah in the middle of the roof? V'kam machshir Rabbi Yaakov. And nevertheless, Rabbi Yaakov deems it fit. So to this, then, to Yuvta de Rav Huna. tiyufta. So then this is a proof against Rav Huna, because Rav Huna told us a minute ago that when it's in the middle of the roof, everyone would agree that it's not valid. So how then can we have this case of Rabbi Yaakov saying that it is valid if it's in the middle of the ground? So Gemara says, "Va'od be'emtzahu depligi." Furthermore, the machlokes would seem to be then that when the roof is in the middle of, sorry, the sukkah is in the middle of the roof, aval al sfas hagag divrei hakol kasher, which would mean then that if it's on the edge of the roof, then everyone's going to hold valid. In which case, lema tehave tiyuvte to Rav Huna b'tarti. In which case, I've got now two proofs, refutations against Rav Huna in two instances. So how are you going to get out of this, Rav Huna? Amalach Rav Huna. Rav Huna would say to you, pligi be'ensa hagag. They're arguing about when the sukkah is in the middle of the wall. V'hu hadin al sfas hagag. And the same is true when the sukkah is on the edge of the roof. V'hai dekami palgi be'ensa hagag. And the fact that they are arguing about the sukkah in the center of the roof, L'hodiacha kocho de Rabbi Yaakov, is coming to teach you how far Rabbi Yaakov's position could possibly go. Da'afilu be'emsa hagag nami machshir. That even if it was in the middle of the roof, it could still be valid. And perhaps then even if it was in the middle of the ground, it could still be valid according to Rabbi Yaakov. That's how far-reaching his leniency could possibly go. Case number 9. Tana Rabbanan. Going back to this case now. Na'at arba kundisin ba'eretz. If I've got my 4 poles in the ground, v'sikechal gaban, and I put schach on top. Rabbi Yaakov Omer, ro'in kol she'ilu yechakaku v'yechalku v'yesh bahen tefach lekan v'tefach lekan nidunin mishum diyumad. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have another mathematical halachic fiction, whatever you want to call it, that we're going to be looking at over here. Okay, hopefully you can see this picture on the screen, which is a picture of one of these wooden poles. Okay, now whether it's a wooden pole which is square in nature or a wooden pole that is circle in nature, what we're being asked to imagine is that if I was to turn this pole into an L-shaped beam, so I carve out everything from this beam so that I am left with an L-shaped piece of wood. The question that Rabbi Yaakov wants to know is there a tefach on each side of that pole? So if I've got a circle pole and I was to shave away everything just to leave an L-shaped pole, will I have a tefach on each side of that pole? That's what we're being asked to imagine over here. Because according to Rabbi Yaakov, if I do have a tefach, then I can rely on something called diyumad. I don't have a very good translation for diyumad, but that's what we're relying on over here. That what we'll end up is with a sukkah with 4 poles, right? But actually, if we were to carve it away, it's a tefach on each side of the sukkah there, and it's a tefach on each side of the sukkah there, and it's a tefach on each side of the sukkah there, and it's a tefach on each side of the sukkah there. So if I can picture in my mind a sukkah of L-shaped beams or L-shaped walls on each each corner of the sukkah, that's what I'm being asked to imagine. So he says, I have to picture each of these beams as if they have been carved out and split up. And I've got a tefach here and I've got a tefach here, in which case nidunim mishum diyumad, in which case they are considered a double post, and a double post is considered to be a partition. Ve'imlav ein nidonin mishum diyumad. Sorry, I didn't have the words up on the screen. And if not, then I can't call this diyumad. I can't call these double posts. Shahaya Rabbi Yaakov Omer, because Rabbi Yaakov holds, unique to Rabbi Yaakov, Diyonde Sukkah Tefach, that the double posts of a sukkah to be considered a wall have to be a tefach. V'Rabbana, the Chachamim Amren, the Chachamim say, Ad sheyehu shtayim kehil chasan u'shlishis afilu tefach. The Chachamim say, no, you're getting confused, my friend. You have to have 2 walls, legit, 2 whole complete walls, and then once you've got 2 complete walls, then your 3rd wall could be a tefach. You can't have a whole sukkah comprised of tefach wall partitions. So, by the way, there's a famous idea here that the word sukkah, the way that it's spelt, indicates to us what we need for a valid sukkah. So the letter samach is fully encapsulated on all 4 sides. So I could have a valid sukkah with 4 walls, or chaf, which is a letter on 3 sides. I don't know if I'm drawing that the right way for the camera or not. But a chaf is enclosed on 3 sides. So I can have a valid sukkah with 3 sides, or I can have a hay. And a hay is 1 across, 1 down, and then a little tefach over there. That's the 3rd valid construct for a wall. So there we go. It's also another famous idea where they call the sukkah the hug from Hashem. And why is it called the hug from Hashem? Because all you need to give someone a hug is a wall there, and a wall there, and then a little bit of a wall there, and then you're giving someone a hug. So there we go. That's all we've got time for today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us on Daf Yomi. We'll see you again next week for page 11, Daf Yud Aleph of Masechah Sukkah.